Thank you very much. I should say that across the week I am a freelance jobbing artist, so I'm quite a nervous speaker. I'm not used to standing up at symposiums. So I'm going to talk about a program that I've been running for 5 years in a freelance capacity called Room 13. Curiosity, experimentation and public outcomes. So the curiosity and experimentation is what happens inside the room there, and the public outcomes is the stuff that comes out of the room. So in my little talk, I'm going to talk about studio thinking or studio habits, which is a term that Lois Hetland describes. And just to talk, I should say all these images are taken from a small, modest publication that I've self-published. So if anybody's interested, I'm going to be around all day. So what is Room 13? Just a brief history. Room 13 was first established in 1994 by the artist Rob Fairley at Kaldor Primary School in Scotland. And Rob was on residency there. And his idea as a resident artist was to set up a residential space, a residency space in the school where students came of their own volition. They came to the studio because they wanted to make art. They weren't timetabled, they weren't measured on it, it wasn't part of the curriculum. They came because they wanted to make art and they wanted to make work as an artist. And Rob was very explicit in that idea that he describes the students as young artists that come to the studio. And the aim of Room 13 is to have a dialogue, an exchange of ideas across different ages. So it works on quite a sort of flat structure. So the other sort of principles that Fairley was very explicit about was the idea that when young people come to the studio to make art, they also try and sell it, or they enter into competitions to try and get funds back into the studio to reinvest in the management of the space and resourcing of the space. So there's also a management committee of young artists, a working committee of young artists that manage the funding that comes back into the studio. So they're the three sort of underlying principles of the Room 13 model. And the Room 13 International, as a movement, is now over 50 schools across the world. Very briefly, in 2014, with the assistance of funding through Create New South Wales, their Fresher Resident Art in Schools, we set up 2 Room 13 models in 2 Sydney schools. And that was a 3-year funding. And I should say that 3 years sounds like a long time, but we're already in term 4. And, you know, to really embed a practice and embed an idea in a school, it takes time. So, you know, I often say that as an artist, I work with materials, but time is a very important material. So 3 years gives you time to really establish a studio and really embed yourself in that school community. Very briefly, One Your Road School is a government school for special purposes. It caters for students years 7 to 12 with mental health or emotional diagnosis, emotional disorder. It's based in Hurstville. Athelstane Public School caters for students K to 6 with 4 support classes. So how the space works. I've already talked about the idea of a practicing committee of young artists. And when I was preparing this little presentation, I kind of thought, you know, look at the heart of what we all do, or what we're all here talking about is young people. And I wanted to try and bring in some of their words and some of their ideas about how they feel the studio runs. So at the start of the year, I sit down with the committee, the lunchtime committee, and I talk about the history of the studio, and then say, well, what do you want to get out of it? What's in it for you this year? So some of these words are the words that are important to them about coming to the studio at lunchtime. I should say that the working committee, they come every lunchtime. They give up their own lunchtime across the year. Because they want to come to the studio. So all these words really resonate for me. We've got free will, experimenting, time to do things in art, think big. And when I was putting this PowerPoint together, I kind of wanted to, because I can't bring the students with me, with the power of cardboard and a colour printer, I've got some of the young artists that have been through the studio. So these are not current artists. When the artists graduate from the studio, I just ask them a question. I say, what does Room 13 mean to you? What has it meant to you? And I've tried to use some of these little phrases to sort of guide me through this brief presentation. So Najat says, Room 13 means creating new things and learning new things. So this is a shot of one of the studios. This is a shot at Athelstane Public School. And the studio, I try and keep it as a really busy working space. The emphasis is on it being a working space. This is actually set up for exhibition. But it is a cavern of curiosity. I want young people to feel that they're stepping into a working space and not a classroom. So here you can see that I'm quite lucky that I get the opportunity to work with different mediums and different scales. So I like it as a busy space that young people come and it kind of gets them excited and they want to make work. Now by comparison, this looks really stark. This is at 1 Euro Road. This was actually just after a move to a demountable. So 1 Euro Road has a very, very strong music program. It has a music therapy program. It also has musicians on staff. In 2016, we amalgamated the two spaces, so we were moving to a demountable. So this is in the very, very early days of working, of sort of morphing into with the music program. In the back corner on the drums there is the resident artist Michael Meebus, who also works with me at 1 Euro. And Michael is a musician, DJ and sound artist. And at the end of my little presentation, I'm going to show you a small piece of work, a small clip of work that we've made together. A lot of the work that we make at 1 Euro with the students, I do a lot of the visuals and Michael does the sound, and it kind of coalesces to be an audio-visual, like a kind of audio-visual poem, I guess. So the space at 1 Euro, by contrast, is a much more flexible space. In his keynote, Nicholas Sirota talked about the importance of creativity and of making original work. And you know, when I run the two studios, I'm really I think that working with hands-on is very, very, very important. When I first set up the studio at Athelstane, I used to get frustrated. I used to see this group of girls always mixing paint, and I used to get frustrated about the idea that why aren't they using that paint? Why is it not going onto a surface? And you know, Mark talked about how busy the curriculum is. And I think often when we give young people materials, we expect them to use them straight away. And there is that joy of working with materials and the alchemy of, you know, when you pour different paints together, you see the transformation and just the importance of hands-on learning. And, you know, it kind of took another teacher actually to say that, you know, maybe let them get this out of the system and then they'll start making work. And I have to think when I'm running the studio, you know, what keeps me curious? What keeps me going as an artist? So I'm always trying to bring in new materials and new processes. So here we see casting with concrete, working with oscillating tools. That's not a rotary tool, it's an oscillating tool. And just the real joy and immediacy of working with hands. And then I think through that studio practice, you know, that yes, there is that you know, it's almost a cliche to talk about that notion of risk. And you know, when you bring in new materials into a studio, there is a real chance of risk. So in the top left there, that's actually my hand, and it was a resin cast that failed. And rather than chuck it in the bin 5 years ago, I keep it in the studio. As I said, the studio is like a sort of cavern of curiosity. And young artists will come in and they'll say, well, what's that about? Is it what's in the glass? Is it real gold? And I'll say to them what it was, and then it led to a public sculpture, and we were testing different materials. And I think, you know, there is that real importance as an artist and as an educator to embrace failure. And through failure, that's where you're going to get new ideas and innovation. In the bottom right corner there is a young artist, Sheila, and she is making a sort of fantasy self-portrait using soldering iron on polystyrene. So in the studio, there is original work and autonomy. And another young artist, Ali, says, room 13 means creativity to me. Now, I pulled up this slide, 2 minutes, bloody hell. I pulled up this slide because Ali was somebody in the studio who, he was at the studio for 3 years. He gave up his lunchtime every year for 3 years. And in year 5, he came and he said, I want to make a drum. So that idea, what Nicholas sort of was saying about creativity as something which didn't exist, this drum didn't exist, it was a waste paper bin, and then it morphed into a drum. And I put the word motivation there because as educators or as practitioners, that is something that we've all struggled with, to motivate the people we work with and to motivate young people. And he was a young person that had real intrinsic motivation. And here there's a great moment of co-learning. He's with one of the teacher coordinators, Trav, and off to the side is Trav's phone, and they're working out how to do a knotting procedure. So this is actually, where the flat structure really works, so we can say, I've never made a drum, let's work it out. So just to close, I just want to end with the words of another young artist. And Ali is another graduate, and he said, room 13 is a place of magic because I love art. And I thought that word magic was so, when I was looking through these figurines in the studio, I thought magic was so special because art is a transformative process for all people that use it. So just moving very, very briefly to finish off into some finished products. Wooleye Creek Park, mixed media digital collage, 3 meters by 1 meter. The small inset there in the top left is teacher librarian Melinda, and she's coaxing, helping a young artist get into position to imagine he's in a canoe. So you can see that the final collage there is all the young people and their teacher kind of in the park, the bats, they're climbing up the rocks, Angie's trying to pull them up the cliff. By contrast, this is a digital treasure hunt that was with One Euro Road School, 6 audio-video works embedded across Hurstville that were accessed via QR code. A big part of the work at One Euro is really getting the young artists back into community and reconnecting them back into their community. And art has been a really important part of that. A work by Athelstane Studio, the back-in-time viewer. It looks like a box brownie. It's actually it's got a small eyepiece in there, and inside is a diorama, which is of the unemployment camp, which was on the site in the 1930s. This won the Youth Prize, $1,000 at the Bayside Sculpture Trail. So that money was reinvested back into their studio, so that was a great learning process. And finally, just to close on back to One Euro, a whole of school project. It's a very, very small school, and a lot of the works take a long time to create there. And this was a whole of school project across the year, paint pen on vellum, 1 meter by 83 centimeters. It's incredible detailed work. This was shown at our first solo exhibition at Hazelhurst Regional Gallery, which was remounted at Hurstville Museum Gallery this year, 2018. And just to finish off, I've got my 1 minute, a little excerpt of a piece of work. And this is, it just gives a sort of a sense of how that the visual art and the sound work coalesce as original work. I'm hoping this plays. I'm hoping this works. There is sound. There is sound with this. Yeah.
Into the sky. Today is the day that my spirit fly. Want to leave this place that is holding me down. Want to get out of this broken town. Gotta get away from here. Gotta face my fear.